You have probably heard the claim that Aryans came from outside of India. Others say that they were always here. At the center of this fierce debate is something that is often brought up as key evidence. Haplogroup R1a. What is it? Why is it so common in South Asia? And can it actually prove or disprove the Aryan migration theory? In this video, we will break it all down in simple terms, and by the end, you will see why this tiny piece of DNA has sparked one of the biggest historical debates in the region. The story of R1a begins far to the north. The oldest known R1a sample comes from a man who lived around 10,700 BCE in northwestern Russia. He belonged to a group called the Eastern Hunter-Gatherers. Over time, we see this lineage continue in nearby areas like Karelia or the Neolithic steppe region of Khvalynsk. By the Bronze Age, R1a had branched out. One major branch, RZ645, appears in the Fatyanovo culture in Russia. From there, it splits into two major lines. RZ283, which is found in corded ware samples from Estonia around 2600 BCE and is now common in Central and Eastern Europe. And then we have RZ93, which is important for South Asia. Almost every ancient DNA sample from Iran and South Central Asia before 2000 BCE shows no sign of R1a, not a single one. When R1a does appear in this region, it comes from a genetic ancestry from the steppe. This suggests that R1a is not originally from South Asia or Iran, but likely arrived from the north, carried by people with steppe ancestry. Whatever I'm explaining right now is the consensus, and we shall discuss further on R1a, Z93, and Z94. This branch, R1a Z93, is especially important because it is often linked to the spread of Indo-Iranian languages from the steppe into South Asia and Iran. But to really understand that claim, we need to go deeper. R1a Z93 is not just one single group, it has several sub-branches, and looking at those sub-clades gives us a clearer picture of how it spread, where it went, and who carried it. The formation dates I will be using come from YFull, which is a well-known database that estimates when different Y-DNA branches split. They do this by counting the number of mutations and assuming a mutation rate of about 1 every 144.41 years. Let us take a closer look at some specific branches of R1a Z93, starting with 3 rare subclades that clearly trace back to the steppe. First, we have RBY226207. It shows up today in places like Tajikistan, Xinjiang region, Kyrgyzstan, and even Italy. YFull also links it to an ancient individual from the Bronze Age Srubnaya local culture, which was located in the steppe. Second is RYP5585. There is an ancient sample from the same Srubnaya local culture from around 1800 BCE. Modern samples are rare, but they show up in places like England, Kuwait, and interestingly, one in Madhya Pradesh, India, though we don't know the person's background or community. I'm talking about the Indian sample here. Third, we have RFGC82884. It includes an Iron Age sample from Turkmenistan around 850 BCE, and another from the Bronze Age Srubnaya region. Today, this branch appears in countries like Hungary, Poland, China, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Russia, and even in parts of the Arab world. These branches are rare in South Asia, and they seem to reflect ancient steppe connections rather than local lineages. Now let us move on to Z94, a major subclade of Z93, formed around 2600 BCE. Z94 itself has been found in ancient steppe Bronze Age samples, and also in Iron Age samples from the Swat Valley in Pakistan. Some Sakha-related remains also show Z94, which fits the larger steppe South Asia connection. The minor one is RY40, and the two major ones are RZ214 and RY3, which we will get to in a bit. So let's quickly look at RY40 first. It formed around 2600 BC as well, but here's the important part. We haven't found a single ancient sample belonging to it so far. But in present-day populations, it was found in samples from South Asia, the Middle East, and a few places in Central Asia and Europe. On YFull, Y40 and its branches appear among Tamil speakers, Bengalis, Pakistanis, Gujaratis, people from Kerala and Konkan, and also in countries like Jordan, Iraq, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and even Tajikistan. The pattern is similar on family tree DNA, with Y40 samples found in Turkey, Saudi, Kuwait, Italy, and South India. What interests me is this, that even though Y40 formed around 2600 BCE, it doesn't appear in any of the 2200 Russian samples on YFull, and that is a big clue. Based on its modern spread, and the lack of ancient steppe samples, this subclade most likely branched out within the Indian subcontinent or nearby. Now let us look at the two major branches of Z94, starting with RZ2124. RZ2124 formed around 2600 BCE as well, and the earliest sample we have is of a man from Poltavka in Samara in Russia, dated to exactly 2600 BCE. Later on, all the Sintashta samples from around 2000 BCE also belong to Z2124. In modern times, Z2124 is quite rare in India and Pakistan, only about 7 to 9% in the Waifu datasets. But in Afghanistan, it makes up a massive 80%. Most likely the Ghaznavid invasions after 900 CE. They were the reason. These were Central Asian Turks who pushed into the Gandhara region, and the Swat Valley samples from that time confirm it. They have more steppe ancestry than the earlier Buddhist or Iron Age samples from Swat Valley. So out of 6 medieval Swat samples, 3 carry R1a, 2 are Z93+, and 1 is Z224+. The plus here shows that they are descendants of Z93, or that their haplogroup is a further descendant of the said haplogroup. Like in this case, Z224+ means the person is carrying a haplogroup that is confirmed to be Z224, but it's also further than that. Next, we discuss about R1a Y3. R1a Y3 is also descended from Z94. The formation date for this subclade is also 2600 BCE. No definite ancient sample has yet been found for R1a Y3. One sample from Ukraine dated to 2000 BCE is questionable, as it is based on a single C to T mutation. However, there is no modern Ukrainian RY3+ sample among the 378 Ukrainian entries on Waifu. Someone pointed out the presence of RY2 in one Ukrainian Cossack on the Y3, which could be a result of Tatar or Bashkir Kipchak input. Most of the Indian subcontinent's R1a falls under R1a Y3. Now we discuss R1a Y2. Y2 descends from Y3 and Y3 comes from Z94. The formation date of this is also around 2600 BCE. Only one sample with terminal haplogroup R1a Y2 is currently available on Waifu, belonging to a man from Kuwait. No further context is available. In the Chobe datasets, there are 16 Indian samples that are R1a Y3+, but Y27 negative. These likely fall under terminal haplogroups Y3, Y2, or FT12493. Now we discuss FT12493. This is also a subclade that descends from R1a Y3. The formation date of this is also 2600 BCE. Only 2 known samples with this rare terminal haplogroup exist. Both are from the Middle East. It is completely absent in all steppe region countries. Given this, it is more likely to have originated within the Indian subcontinent. The 16 RY3 and RY27 negative samples in the Chobe data likely include individuals with this terminal lineage. Now we discuss the subclade F1417, which is a descendant of R1a Y27. R1a Y27 is a descendant of R1a Y2, and Y2 comes from Y3, and Y3 comes from R1a Z94. The formation date of this subclade of R1a is around 2300 BCE. 10 modern men from the Middle East fall under this branch. On the FTDNA database, one Turkish Romani male also carries this mutation. One ancient sample from Alai Nora, Kyrgyzstan, 400 CE, and 4 Kipchak Turkic-speaking Tatars and Bashkirs from Russia are also downstream of F1417. This pattern needs context. The Kipchak language, once spoken by Buddhist communities in Central Asia, was historically linked to Indo-Aryan linguistic influence. Alai Nora lies along the Silk Road route from Pakistan to Xinjiang. Early Kipchak inscriptions show Buddhist Indo-Aryan roots, which could possibly explain how Y27+ originating in the Indian subcontinent reached Tatars and Bashkirs. Now let's talk about R1a L657, which formed around 2300 BCE. R1a L657 is actually the most common R1a subclade in India today, but interestingly, it is completely absent from ancient DNA samples between 2300 BCE and 0 CE. The earliest time it shows up is in a sample from 100 BCE in Xinjiang region, but even that one is questionable. It's based on a G to A mutation, which is often ignored in ancient Y-DNA analysis because such mutations can be unreliable. If we don't count that, the sample is just Y27+ and not necessarily L657. So where did L657 come from? Well, there is a strong reason to believe L657 originated in the Indian subcontinent. For one, we have genetic evidence that India had contact with Xinjiang by around 500 BCE. Also, Buddhism began spreading to Xinjiang via the Silk Road around 200 BCE, which might explain how this lineage reached there. Looking at modern rifle data, L657 is in 19% of Indian men, 13% in Pakistan, 19% in Bangladesh, and 15% in Sri Lanka. Also present in a few scattered individuals in Afghanistan, Iran, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. L657 is also found in multiple people in the Arab world, but not a single L657 sample in 2,200 plus Russians or over 1,200 Ukrainians, Poles, and Baltic people combined. And that is a big deal. So overall, based on both the ancient DNA gap and the modern distribution, L657 almost certainly formed within South Asia and not on the steppe. Now you might notice that there are a lot of Z94 plus samples in the Middle East. But if we look at it as a percentage, it is actually quite small. One reason it looks like there are so many is because the Middle East is highly oversampled on rifle, especially when compared to India. To give you an idea, Saudi Arabia is sampled 98 times more than the world average per person. Kuwait is sampled 360 times more. Meanwhile, India is only sampled at 0.07 times the world average, so it's actually undersampled. Because of this imbalance, it's hard to compare fairly, but I believe that the presence of India-specific R1a lineages in the Arab world might be linked to historical migrations. Groups like the Romani, Kaulia, Nawar, and Dom people migrated from India to areas like Iraq, Syria, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia in the last 1,000 years. And that could explain some of these samples. Also, some samples might just be modern-day migrant workers from India, Pakistan, or Bangladesh who moved to the Gulf countries. Sadly, rifle doesn't always give us enough background information to tell. Now, to back this up, Underhill et al. 2015 noted something very interesting. They said R1a M780, which is another name for R1a Y3, occurs at high frequency in India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and the Himalayas, and is also found in over 30% of Roma people in places like Croatia and Hungary. That supports the idea that RY3 lineages made it to Middle East and Europe through Romani migrations from India. It is also possible that some of this movement goes back even further to the Bronze or Iron Age, but we just don't have ancient DNA from those time periods in the Middle East to confirm it. When we look at where R1a Y3+ is most common and most diverse, it is clearly the Gangetic Plains and eastern India. That means not only there are more people with this lineage there, but also more genetic variety within that group. And usually, when a region shows both high frequency and high diversity, it suggests that the lineage has been there the longest and probably expanded from that area. So based on that, it's very likely that R1AY3 spread out from the Gangetic Plains and eastern India. So does this support the Aryan invasion or migration theory? The theory that proposes a largely male-mediated migration of steppe people who spoke Indo-European languages, in this case Indo-Iranian. Before we jump into conclusions about languages and haplogroups, let us clear something up. Why DNA doesn't determine what language people speak. That's a social thing, not biological. Today, people with R1a haplogroup speak all kinds of languages, Indo-Aryan, Iranian, European, but also Dravidian, Turkic, and even Semitic languages. So we can't say this haplogroup means that language. Instead, the best way to understand language shift is to look at autosomal DNA, because that reflects ancestry from both parents and gets shuffled each generation. Y-DNA just comes from the father's side, but autosomal DNA tells you how much of the total ancestry came from migrants versus locals. When you combine that with X and Y chromosome data, you can even guess the sex ratio of the migration. As archaeologist Peter Bellwood said in 2020, language is spread in the mouths of migrating populations, and that means the more genetic impact migrants had, the more likely they influenced or even replaced the local language. A good example of this is Europe. In the Bronze Age, groups with high levels of Yamna steppe ancestry moved into Europe. Some cultures, like Côte d'Ivoire, had over 70% steppe ancestry, and today they speak Indo-European languages. That's a huge genetic and linguistic impact. Now compare that with the Basque people. Most Basque men carry the R1b haplogroup, which is linked to steppe migrations as well, but the Basque people still speak a non-Indo-European language. Why? Because their autosomal steppe ancestry is only about 40%. So despite high R1b on the Y chromosome, the lower overall migration impact did not fully change their language. So again, autosomal ancestry gives a better picture of language shift than Y-DNA alone. Now, when we talk about the R1a Z94 branch in South Asia, especially subclades like RY3 or RL657, we see something interesting. Apart from RZ224, which clearly comes from the steppe, most other subclades under Z94 do not seem to have been born there. They may descend from steppe ancestors, yes, but their own branches formed after those lineages had already moved into South Asia. That's a very crucial detail. Why? Well, because a new Y-DNA mutation starts in just one man. So if most modern Indian R1a comes from RY3, and that clade formed around 2600 BCE in India, then that single Indian man became the founder of nearly all RY3 lineages seen in the region today. When I say Indian or India, in this context, it is South Asia. I often use those terms interchangeably. So yes, let's move on. The fact that R1a Y3 was born in a single Indian man or a single South Asian man who became the founder of nearly all the Y3 lineages seen in the region today doesn't support a mass migration of steppe men into India. Instead, it suggests that local South Asian populations expanded organically after this mutation appeared. This local expansion is actually backed by a paper which found multiple major male line expansions in South Asia between 4,000 to 7,300 years ago. Relevant to our discussion, R1a Z93 expanded in South Asia between 4,000 to 4,500 years ago. So that's roughly 2,500 BCE. The Indus Valley civilization was thriving at this period. This is known as the mature Harappan phase. It clearly shows that some R1a lineages were already booming within South Asia during that period. Now, if you have done your research, you may be wondering, why hasn't Slavman discussed the Swat Valley samples yet? Well, yes, steppe ancestry did arrive in India, but it is far later, starting in the Swat Valley during the Bronze Age, because the Swat Valley samples are the oldest steppe admixed samples that we have. We get more noticeable admixture in Swat Valley by around 1650 BCE. That's when we see 15 to 20% steppe ancestry in the Swat Iron Age samples. But out of 44 males found in Swat Valley, only 2 of them had R1a, and both of them were Z94 and not Y3. Also, this wasn't a large male-dominated migration. In fact, Narasimhan et al. 2019 paper suggests that the steppe admixture was likely brought in by women. In their 2019 paper, Narasimhan and colleagues make a bold claim. They write this. What does this mean in simple terms? They're saying that even though the Swat Valley DNA shows low male R1a Z93 input, modern South Asians show higher R1a, and so the steppe ancestry must have come mainly via men, specifically through men carrying R1a Z93. They even say that this shows a male-biased migration from the steppe, reversing the earlier Swat Valley pattern. But there is a serious problem here. Let's look at where the 221 individuals that were tested come from. Nowhere do the authors stop to analyze which Z93 subclades these people carry. They just lump all South Asian R1a as R1a Z93+, and they treat it as equivalent to steppe MLBA ancestry. But this is misleading. The authors don't apply such sweeping assumptions when talking about Europe, the Caucasus, or West Asia. For example, the Southern Arc paper from 2022 carefully breaks down R1b into regional subclades for Armenia, Iran, and the steppe. Why not give Indian data the same nuance? We have known since at least 2015 that R1a Z93 has many branches, and in India, the dominant ones are RY3, aka M780, and RL657, not Z224, which is the branch found in steppe samples between 2000 to 1000 BCE. When we look more closely at the 1000 genomes data, only 14 out of 64 South Asian samples are Z124+. That's just 14 out of 221 men, or around 3% with a 95% confidence interval, going up to 9.5% at most. Compare that to Narasimhan's claim of 22 to 34%, and you'll see that the numbers just don't add up. So if we correct the calculation using actual Z224 frequencies, the conclusion completely collapses. There's no strong evidence for a large-scale male-driven steppe migration into South Asia, and this result matches what we already saw in the ancient DNA from Swat Iron Age samples. Only 2 out of 44 men had R1a, and neither of them was from the Indian-specific Y3 lineages. Once again, we are seeing a pattern. The genetic and archaeological histories of India and Europe are very different, but the Harvard team seems to be copy-pasting the European model of massive male-driven steppe expansions onto India. This kind of framework ignores the complexity of South Asia's own history. What we should be considering is this: a small number of steppe-derived men, possibly carrying the early Z93 or Z94, arrived into South Asia around 2600 BCE, and their lineages like R1a and R1a expanded within India itself over generations. But this doesn't support a massive population movement, and it certainly doesn't explain a complete language shift across such a vast and diverse region like South Asia. So the theory that just a few migrants could come in and change the language of an entire civilization during its mature phase without major demographic impact isn't just weak, it's deeply flawed. The Swat Valley is central to discussions about how steppe ancestry entered the Indian subcontinent. Archaeogenetic evidence suggests that the steppe-related ancestry appeared in Swat around 1650 BCE, but beyond that, things get murky. Specifically, there is no confirmed date for when this ancestry entered the broader Indian gene pool. The Y-DNA subclades R1a Y3 and R1a Y40, both being branches of R1a Z94, are common among modern Indians. We can date their origins to roughly 2600 BCE, but their formation likely happened within South Asia and not on the steppe. So the question arises: if these lineages came from the steppe, where is the steppe autosomal ancestry in ancient samples? The answer to this is that it got diluted over generations. Imagine this: a single man from the Eurasian steppe region carrying the Y-DNA haplogroup R1a Z94 enters South Asia during the mature Harappan period. He's not part of an invading army. He's just one migrant, possibly fleeing conflict or seeking better prospects. He integrates into local society, marries a local woman from Indus, and raises a family. His sons inherit his Y chromosome and roughly half of his steppe ancestry. But as generations pass and they continue marrying local women, their steppe genetic signature fades. Each generation has less and less steppe ancestry. But the Y-DNA, the R1a Z94 lineage, continues unchanged through the male line. This is how founder effects work. One male line under the right social and reproductive conditions can grow enormously over time. Possibly, this man's grandsons developed the R1a Y3 mutation. Later, one of his descendants, carrying a further downstream branch, R1a L657, achieved massive reproductive success. His male line spread rapidly and widely across the subcontinent. But was this person a steppe warrior who imposed his language and culture on millions? Unlikely. By that time, his family had been local for generations. His steppe ancestry had diluted his culture, his identity, his language. All of them were native to the Indus Valley or native to South Asia. What gave his lineage an edge wasn't conquest, but social dynamics, status, or reproductive success. They had more children. Today, R1a L657 is the dominant R1a lineage in India, representing over 70% of all R1a lineages in the country. Others like R1a Z2124 likely came later with historical groups like the Scythians. So what does this tell us? It tells us that a haplogroup can become dominant without invasions or mass migrations. Just one male from the steppe marrying into a local society could spark a genetic legacy that could last for a millennia without causing a language shift or civilizational collapse. The rise of L657 in India was likely not a result of violent steppe migrations, but a slow natural process shaped by founder effects, family expansions, and social dynamics. By the 7th generation, the autosomal signal vanishes, but the Y chromosome survives, including any new subclades like Y3 or Y40 that may have formed along the way. This simple scenario explains how steppe-derived Y lineages like RY3 and RY40 could persist in modern Indians without leaving a strong autosomal footprint, and the archaeological data backs this. For example, the 2000 BCE Rakhigarhi individual shows no steppe ancestry at all, and Narasimhan et al. 2019 paper also found no signs of early steppe admixture in the broader population. This isn't a unique case, and there are multiple examples where Y chromosome lineages survive in populations that don't carry matching autosomal ancestry. For instance, in the 850 CE Rupkund A group, the only two males carrying R1a had zero to minimal steppe ancestry, while other individuals with much higher steppe ancestry did not carry R1a at all. We see the same pattern in the Chentu tribe of South India. They have about 25% R1a frequency, yet there are studies that found no detectable steppe ancestry in them. Another striking case comes from ancient Karelia in Russia, where a male carrying the CHG or Iranian-related Y haplogroup J had purely Eastern hunter-gatherer autosomal DNA, with no CHG ancestry at all. These cases make it very clear that Y chromosome lineages don't always stay tied to the ancestral genetic background they came with. Over time, they can continue through generations, even as the original autosomal ancestry gets diluted or replaced. So when we see R1a Z94 subclades like Y3 or Y40 in India, it doesn't necessarily mean that there was a large-scale migration from the steppe. It could simply reflect a small number of early male migrants who settled into local populations, married locally, and passed on their Y DNA, while their broader genetic ancestry gradually faded away through continued mixing. A good comparison comes from the Southern Arc supplement, where a similar pattern is discussed regarding the Y haplogroup R1b. If you swap the terms, replace EHG with steppe, Armenia or Iran with India, and RM269 with R1a, the logic applies perfectly to what likely happened in South Asia. This brings up an important point. Y chromosome lineages and autosomal ancestry can become separated over time, but the reverse is also possible. They can reassociate purely by chance in later populations. Over thousands of years, population dynamics, genetic drift, social structures, and random mating can drastically reshape such associations. For example, we say R1a and steppe are correlated, but from what we have discussed now, it is likely that R1a and the steppe ancestry that is present in the South Asian populations is not from the same source. So the South Asian R1a is older than the South Asian steppe ancestry. When studying modern DNA, it is risky to draw conclusions based on only observed correlations between Y DNA haplogroups and ancestry components. Correlation is not causation, especially over a 4,000-year time span. The only reliable way to understand these shifts is through ancient DNA sampled across time from the same region. That's what gives us a real picture of how genetic profiles evolved. So in conclusion, the genetic evidence just doesn't support a massive wave of steppe men invading or migrating to India after 1700 BCE. Instead, lineages like Y3 and Y40 seem to have originated in the Indian subcontinent, long before any supposed mass migration. The idea that a huge male migration replaced the local population and language doesn't hold up when you look closely at the data. Well, small groups of migrants or individuals from the steppes could have mixed in over time without completely changing the genetic and cultural landscape. The language shift cannot happen with just a handful of migrants who moved into the Indus during the mature Harappan phase. Show me one example where, say, 50 men moved into a distant, prosperous land and they managed to change the language of 5 million locals. It just doesn't add up. And yes, the population of Indus civilization during its mature Harappan phase is estimated to be more than 5 million. Compare that with the population of steppe cultures. This is your own research. Consider this a homework. You have to search the population of steppe cultures and then compare it with the population of Indus during the mature Harappan phase. Alright, that was it for this video. Hope you liked it. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you want to see more videos like this, do not forget to subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next video.